Good afternoon. I'm Bob Sanchez, the Policy Director of the James Madison Institute. On behalf of JMI and the Foundation for Excellence in Education, I welcome you to this interesting session about America's high schools. We have a distinguished panel of guests today: John Winn, Matt Gandal, Deborah Lyons, Roger Sampson, and Tom Vander Ark. And we will the moderator will be John Winn, the former Commissioner of Education in Florida. And this topic is to turn high schools from dropout factories to graduation machines. Mr. Winn?
Thank you. I can't tell you what a treat it is for me to be back and greet so many friends and colleagues that I had the pleasure to work with during my 35 years of education. I won't share the ones that I've known for the full 35 years, but it really is truly a pleasure to have an opportunity to see you all and to be invited to be the moderator for this panel. You're in for a real treat this afternoon in terms of the quality of our panelists, the perspectives of our panelists in talking about high school reform. Before that, I'd say just a little bit about myself. I retired from public service in Florida after 35 years in education, and I count myself as a native Floridian, which is kind of rare. Well, actually, when I was 3 years old, my mother snuck my brother and me over the border from Georgia to Florida, and but Florida is all I've ever known, and just loved every role that I was privileged to play in education, beginning with a classroom teacher. So it was a fabulous experience for me. Before introducing our panelists and turning it over to them, I'd like to kind of frame the discussion a little bit and ask the panelists to, as they share with you not only their current efforts and programs to improve high schools across the nation and their perspectives, if they would think about a couple of perspectives that I would like to, that I believe get to the goals and objectives of today's panel discussion. The first, focus on dropouts. We all know we've done amazing amount of research in terms of students dropping out, who they are, their characteristics, their education history, and those kinds of things. And really, they produce some rather perplexing problems and frames of reference that I would like the panelists to think a little bit about in talking about their work. First of all, we know that as a general rule, we know that dropouts are each individual human beings with hopes and aspirations of their own, with a history of their own, and should be considered such. We also know that the vast majority of dropouts are behind academically. And we know that we have, in the past in education, the basic approach to students being behind academically has been to remediate them. And we know that after decades of a variety of federal and state remediation programs, that what we wound up really doing in many cases is having lower expectations for those students in those classrooms, and certainly not structuring the instruction and providing the kinds of teachers that are needed to not only make up for lost ground, but also keep up with the increased standards as they move through high school. But interestingly enough, what we also know is over 80% of them say that high school is not challenging. So what does that tell us about high schools? That they're behind and need to make up for skills that somehow they missed along the way, yet they view high school as not challenging them, motivating them to achieve at a more accelerated rate than many of their peers have to do so. We also know that to all adolescents, relationships come first. Any of us who have been parents or are parents of adolescents know that all too clearly. All of a sudden, mom and dad have been kind of moved over to this corner, and my friends are over here. And, you know, the friends come first. And we know that in large high schools, a sense of anonymity and moving through the production model of large high schools hurts that relationship, both fostering relationships between students, but also fostering relationships between adults in high schools and students as well. What we also know is that they don't see a relevance of education to what they might want to do. We know that, that high school dropouts or students that are behind, we believe they don't set goals, and we believe they don't set goals. But perhaps we just don't know what their goals are, and perhaps we haven't structured an education environment to bring out those goals and help them understand, articulate, and plan towards those goals. And we know that through the high schools at work and other programs that doing that helps students work towards something. And we also know that everybody at every age, whether you're a young child or whether you're an adult or senior citizen, everyone responds to people who believe in them. And they know the difference. We all know the difference pretty quickly, whether our colleagues, our peers, our bosses, or our children, whether they believe in us, whether we believe in them. And so I think that is an important consideration. The second kind of framework is stepping back a bit and saying, how big is this problem? Now, I don't mean how big in terms of numbers. We, you know, if you say over 1 million students drop out a year nationally, it just sort of gets fade away in policy discussions and so in situations that I call kind of a weightless environment. A policy discussion in a weightless environment means nobody has to leave and do something concrete as a result. But that becomes a number. But when I say think about how big the problem is, what I mean is what are all the structures and mechanisms that keep high schools from responding to the many different demands of high school students and their communities and their parents? That is, what about teacher certification? How are we preparing teachers? What about state policy on certification and assessment, whether we're requiring teachers in math and science, for example, to have content knowledge? What about teacher shortage efforts to do that? What about setting high standards for curriculum like the Achieve project? What about providing incentives to do better? What are all the systems, statewide, district-wide, and in school that need to be addressed all at once? We have a tendency of Americans, and I think it's human nature, to say, okay, if we do X, then we're done. We're going to solve the problem. But my experience is just the opposite. You cannot rely, we as a country cannot rely on the extraordinary leader who comes in and through sheer force of will, personality, ingenuity, and drive turns around a school. We've got to examine how the systems that support that school at every level and the practices that keep schools that are high poverty schools, perhaps with fewer high quality teachers and so on. There's no policy in any school district that says we're going to assign, you know, teachers over here or whatever, we're going to intentionally shortchange students, but it happens. And it's not a policy that you can focus on, but if you delve deeply enough into the issue, you can find that practice is very important. And finally, do high schools kind of get a little bit of a bum rap? In that, do we focus too much on high schools when we realize, when you look at the NAEP results, 30% of our 8th graders going into high school are below basic, 30%. And do the systems that support our high schools, that provide our training, provide our curriculum, provide our teachers, provide our funding, are they designed to address these problems? And so maybe we ought to be thinking about, you know, a state, what the state needs to do, what the district needs to do. Most of those, we all know that the vast majority of those 30% below basic are going to be promoted into the 9th grade. And we also know that most high schools are not prepared to address that. And we also know that they're not evenly distributed. Some high schools have 80% below basic, you know, some have less than 5. So we need to think about those structures. If we have a student, for example, that falls a month behind, 1 month behind every school year from kindergarten to the 8th grade, they're 2 years behind. But did anybody notice, are our metrics specific enough to see that very slow, often unnoticed falling farther and farther and farther behind? And what can we do as a system to make sure that high schools have more students that are prepared to graduate? That's not to say that high schools don't share a big part of the problem, because NAEP also shows that 41% of 12th graders are below basic. And that's after most of the kids have already dropped out. So if you have a higher percent of your 12th graders, who are supposed to be your highest achieving students, is higher than your entering students against a smaller number, something's wrong. Something's wrong. Even students on grade level are falling behind in our high schools. So I'd ask the panelists to think about those kinds of perspectives. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel. First, we have Matt Gandal, who's the Executive Vice President of Achieve. He directs the American Diploma Project that many of you know. They have 35 states signed up for the American Diploma Project. And we all know that the backbone for education is a strong, rigorous curriculum. And without having those standards, without articulating those and show how those translate into daily instruction, then we're missing the boat. So we're pleased to have Matt here. Deborah Lyons is Director of Workforce Development in the state of Georgia and advises the governor of Georgia on workforce development issues, came from the private sector to bring a perspective on training and preparing students for today's careers and today's workforce needs in the state of Georgia. And we know they're doing a lot of work crossing over between education and workforce training there. So we're happy to have Deborah with us. Roger Sampson is the president of ECS, and I think we've all at one time or another been to ECS-sponsored, Education Commission state-sponsored activities. I met Roger when he was Commissioner of Education in Alaska, and he's been honored, as all of our panelists have. He was the Rural Superintendent of the Year, the National Rural Superintendent. And let me give you a perspective for those, particularly in the Southwest, about rural and what we mean by rural when you talk about a state like Alaska. One of the things I learned about Alaska is 25% of their schools have 3 or fewer teachers. Now, folks, that's pretty rural. And that's considered rural. And the really small schools are considered remote. So they have a classification even smaller than that. So Roger, and by the way, if there's anyone here who's not followed the Education Commission of the states, they do a fabulous job in posting state policies on a whole variety of issues. If there's an issue in education, ECS is working on it, convening leaders together to resolve those. Tom Vander Ark is here. He is the president of the X Prize Foundation. Talking about thinking big, the X Prize Foundation provides the X Prize for really breakthrough innovation to improve humanity. And we talk about a prize, we're talking about the neighborhood of $10 million. So we have some really national motivation going on for breakthrough innovation in education and in other areas as well. Tom was also the education director of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which many of you know has very, very strong commitment to education. And I think Bill Gates had identified high school reform and improvement as the #1 education challenge in the United States. So we appreciate Tom being here with his perspective on the many good programs that not only he's been involved in the past, but that he's involved in now. So with that, I'll introduce Matt. Would you like to come up?
Good afternoon. See if I can get this technology up here. Give me 1 second. Okay. Well, thanks for giving me a few minutes to speak with you this afternoon. Just for those of you not as familiar with my organization, Achieve was created a little over 10 years ago by governors and business leaders nationally to work with states to help them raise academic standards and achievement in their schools. We focus exclusively on issues around curriculum standards, assessment, and accountability. And one of the reasons we were created was governors in particular wanted a way to compare with one another and even abroad with other countries how their expectations shaped up, and they wanted an independent place to turn outside of the federal government for that help. So we've have a 10-year track record now of working in these areas. But over the last several years, our work is focused very much so at this nexus between K-12 and young people's post-secondary endeavors. And what I want to talk to you about for my time here is around expectations in high school and whether we're expecting enough or the right stuff of students before we graduate them and hand them a diploma. Because I do think that is at the center of much of what we need to be doing. I think if you think back to our luncheon conversation, wherever things go in the future with No Child Left Behind, I think that this country is very committed to a standards-based approach to education. The question is, how will we know if we've got our standards right? I don't think I need to educate you on this, but for us it's always the right backdrop for talking about these issues, which is how are we doing with kids, not simply test scores, but how many are graduating and moving on and being successful. And this is just a quick reminder of what our dropout problem is, as John has mentioned, and that it's a bigger problem for minority students than for white students, but it's a problem nevertheless across the board. Equally problematic is those who do go on to college. Far too many of them are remediated immediately in reading, writing, or mathematics. As you can see here, nearly a third who go to either a 2- or 4-year institution right out of high school immediately enrolled in remedial courses. And it's about half, 50%, who go to community colleges are remediated, and the numbers are much higher in some community colleges. The dirtiest secret of all in higher ed, in my view, is the percentage who take remedial courses who ultimately will never earn a degree is sky high, 76% who are mediated in reading and 63% who are mediated in mathematics will never earn a post-secondary credential. So something's not working, both in terms of their ability to leave high school unprepared and what the higher ed institutions are not able to do to then get them up to standard in order for them to actually earn a credential. Put that together with the economy, and you'll see that more than 2/3 of new jobs that are being created in this decade that's just ending require some level of post-secondary education, a 2- or 4-year degree or training certificate. Okay, so the importance of post-secondary credentials is increasing, and if you look at it over time, over a 30-year period, you'll see that the opportunities for young people with post-secondary credentials is going up and will continue to go up, and the opportunities for those who have either no high school credential or even a high school credential is on the downward slope. Okay, so if you add all this up, the questions we ought to be asking ourselves are how do we ensure that we're giving young people an adequate opportunity to be successful after high school, and what does the diploma really represent when we pass them from one system to another? Here's an interesting snapshot. If you take the entire 9th grade cohort nationally, this is estimated data, but it's very powerful, and very few will argue with the numbers. Only 7 in 10 will graduate high school in 4 years. Only 39%, about 4 out of 10, will immediately enroll in college from that 9th grade cohort. Only 27 of those 100 9th graders will return for their sophomore year, and only 18 of those 100 9th graders will earn a post-secondary credential on time, and that on time means a bachelor's degree within 6 years of entering college or an associate's degree within 3 years of entering college. Okay, now unfortunately data like this is not collected state by state and presented this way, although Florida has probably the best data system in the country, so you probably have the ability to do it. But this is very alarming when you really look at how many kids we're losing along the way and their opportunities that go away along with that, the missed educational opportunities. So the work we've been doing is really back to standards and expectations. What does it really take when you get out of high school to be ready for success? What does it take to be ready for college-level courses? And what does it take to be ready for good job opportunities academically? And I want to talk for you a minute about the research we've done and what we've learned. And then I want to talk to you about what states are doing about it. We launched, as John mentioned, something called the American Diploma Project years ago, along with some other national partners, some of whom the Fordham Foundation is actually here at this conference. In order to really understand what those core skills are that young people need, we worked in the post-secondary arena with over 300 colleges and universities in a number of states at the 2- and 4-year level, and an array of faculty to understand, particularly in English and mathematics, what are must-have competencies if you're going to avoid remediation and be successful across the liberal arts curriculum. We also worked with employers to understand what are the reading, writing, mathematics, communication skills that are necessary to be successful in a variety of mid to high skills jobs, okay? There's a lot of research to back this up, but let me just give you the main takeaways. First of all, strong degree of convergence. College ready equals work ready. If you're talking about jobs that pay well enough to support a family, allow for benefits, and provide opportunities for upward mobility. In today's economy, you need the same level of math skills, the same ability to read, write, and communicate to get those jobs as you do to go in and take credit-bearing courses in college. In fact, for many of the jobs, they require some level of post-secondary education in order to be considered. That message has not penetrated very widely, but it's beginning to. I think most people typically think of college ready as a higher standard than work ready, and we really need to help debunk that myth. Second thing we did was we looked at what does it take to earn a high school diploma across the country, particularly looking at what states require. And this was our second finding, a big, what we call expectations gap. We looked at the academic standards, the curriculum standards. We looked at the courses that students are required to take in order to earn a diploma. We looked at the exams that states are giving, graduation exams. And in all three cases, there was a sizable gap between what was expected or measured on those instruments and what we learned by talking to post-secondary and employers young people need when they leave high school and arrive on their doorstep. So essentially, from a young person's perspective, I can do everything that's asked of me all through K-12 and in high school, take the courses, pass the tests, meet the standards, walk across the stage, get a diploma, walk into an employer or into a college, onto a college campus and take a placement test and be told I'm not ready. And it's that problem that we have really dedicated organizationally ourselves to helping states address in the years ahead, because we think it's patently unfair and unethical, and we've got to do something about it. So the good news is we've got a network of states that we launched. Again, governors, state commissioners of education, business leaders, and higher education leaders who have banded together to try to do something about this. In 2005, when we started this, there were 13 states, as you can see here, that were the ones who came together and asked Achieve to lead a network of states on this agenda. And since then, we've grown to 33 states who are part of this network. And in the rest of my 5 minutes, I'm going to tell you what they've been doing. These are the 4 policy priorities they've set. It's all about aligning expectations, whether it's standards, graduation requirements, assessment, or accountability, all with the needs of the post-secondary and the workforce. And very briefly, here's what they're doing in each area. When it comes to standards, when we started this work, very few states could say that they'd looked very carefully at what it takes to take credit-bearing courses in college or to get good jobs and use skills on the jobs and use that to go back and reshape their K-12 standards. It's simply not the way K-12 academic standards were put together. They were put together based on what was desirable for young people to learn rather than what was essential by talking to the end users. And we've gone through a number of years of work with states now to try to help them do that, and we're now up to all these shaded states who have gone back and recalibrated, revised their high school standards in particular to reflect college readiness and work readiness standards. In the states that are in dark blue, we've actually done analyses of their standards and can verify that alignment. So 19 states, and there's a growing number, as you can see here in this map, who are in the process of doing that work. So really, in the next couple years, we think the vast majority of states will have taken a fresh look at their high school academic standards, at least in English and mathematics, and come out with a new set that's much more highly correlated with college and career readiness standards. When it comes to graduation requirements, in our research, what we learned is that for young people to be successful in either college or work, they need 4 years of rigorous math, at least through the Algebra 2 level, or its equivalent, and 4 years of rigorous English courses. When we launched this work, only 2 states had set their graduation requirements at that level. Today, we're up to 19 states that have set requirements at that level for earning a diploma, and we expect those numbers to grow as well very quickly. The different shading here, the dark blue states have simply said that's going to be a required curriculum in order to get a diploma. In the light blue states, they've said it's going to be the default curriculum, that you'll automatically be enrolled as a 9th grader in this course of study, but there's an opt-out provision that parents can talk to the teachers, sign a waiver saying, I want my child to be in a less challenging curriculum, and I understand the implications in his or her future. Either way, it's a huge step forward from the opt-in kind of strategy where you have to fight to get into a rigorous curriculum in most schools and districts, and we know the students and families who typically lose out in that one. So this is a big deal, and we expect these numbers to increase in the years ahead. Why is that so important? This will show you that the level of mathematics you take in high school is the biggest predictor of your opportunities in post-secondary to earn a credential. The more rigorous courses you take, the better your chances. Okay, overall, that's national, federal data. And if you're worried about the achievement gap, which I think we all are, if you look at, on the left side, all college entrants, African American, Latino, and white students, and you look on the right side, those who took a more rigorous high school curriculum, you can see how the chances, the gap between those who go and complete college goes from 30% down to 13%, just based on having the access and opportunity to take a rigorous curriculum in high school. So the curriculum in high school is a huge equalizer if we give children a chance to take it. There are a whole lot of challenges that come along with doing this, including supporting students so they can be successful, making sure the dropout rate doesn't go up as you raise requirements, ensuring teachers are prepared and the like, but again, there's a growing number of states that are taking this very seriously. Very quickly, high school testing, as I mentioned, is a gap. This just gives you a quick flavor for the graduation exams states are giving. Most of them are moving toward more rigorous, at least topical areas, algebra and geometry central, for example, in high school. But if you look at the level of algebra that's being measured in these tests, you'll see it's predominantly pre-algebra, maybe Algebra 1 with very little advanced algebra, just to remind you of that gap that we're talking about. So a growing number of states are trying to build college and career readiness tests into their high school assessment system so that all students are being measured on these skills. It's slow going, but there's some very interesting programs maybe in the discussion that I can tell you about, because I know I'm running out of time, where post-secondary institutions are working with K-12 to agree on examinations that will be used not only to measure high school learning, but to say that students are ready for college-level courses, and rather than having 2 separate testing systems that never talk to one another and never meet. Very interestingly, there's a group of states that we're working with on common end-of-course exams across states, particularly in Algebra 2. 14 states are developing a common exam. They've just given it for the first time this spring. It will also have a college-ready cut score on it that the states agree to that says students are ready for credit-bearing courses in college. Very powerful when states work across state lines to try to agree on standards and measures. And I think you'll be hearing more about this in the future if it's successful. Last point, what are we holding high schools accountable for? If we don't actually give them incentives to care about all these issues and work toward these standards for young people, we can have all the measures and standards we want and it won't make a difference. And right now it's proficiency on lower level exams that measure early high school content that's the core driver for high school accountability. So something needs to change there. Okay, and here's what we think it needs to consist of. First of all, an accurate graduation rate that many states are beginning to adopt that says 4 years later what percentage of the 9th graders have earned a diploma. Whether students have taken a college and career-ready curriculum in high school, whether they've reached a score on an assessment that's meaningful for college and career readiness, as I was just describing. And ultimately, we think states like Florida can do it, but very few can, ought to be able to follow students after they leave high school and see how they're doing in post-secondary in the workplace and use data on their success when they arrive in those places to feed back to high schools in some meaningful manner. This is what should be happening. Here's the number of states currently doing these things. Okay, and for those of you who know math well, you know that if there are 0 doing one of the 4 things, you know overall there are 0 doing all of the 4 things. So right now, very few high schools around the country, certainly not because the states are doing it, are being given incentives or information to get kids ready for college and careers. It's happening in a number of places. It's usually driven by the high schools or the districts. The question is whether state leaders, whether you're a legislator or a state commissioner of education or a governor, can step up on these issues and say we're going to make this a priority in our next generation of policy. We think it will happen. The question is how quickly will it happen in order to help young people get a more meaningful diploma, those who do graduate. And this is the kind of work that our organization is involved in this American Diploma Project. So thank you. I know I've gone over by a minute or two, but appreciate your listening to me.
Deborah Lyons, Director of Workforce Development, State of Georgia.
Thank you so much. And so I get to be technology. Let's see if I can go on and find which one I am. Debbie, there I am. Okay, I'm work ready. Good afternoon, all. Thank y'all so much for attending this session today, since you could choose which session you wanted to be at. Before I start actually talking about Work Ready and what we're doing in Georgia, I want to preface this by saying I am on the workforce development side of Governor Perdue's office in Georgia. And I'm going to say I'm going to marry perfectly with the American Diploma Project because workforce and education are working very well together in Georgia. I also want to just mention a little bit about what Governor Perdue says when he goes out and talks to high school students graduating and college students who are graduating. I had the opportunity to review one of his speeches recently, and he tells them, you know, when I was growing up, my mom and dad had to tell me, finish everything on my plate, because the kids in India and China are starving. He says, I'm going to have to tell my grandchildren pretty soon, finish high school, finish college, because the kids in India and China are starving for your jobs. And that's the message we all need to continue to deliver. And so I encourage you to continue to take that out with you. So with that, let me start a little bit and tell you what we're doing. And it all starts with the governor's vision. And when Governor Perdue came into office, he looked at ways of linking education and workforce together and aligning it with economic development. And we're doing that at a local level, a regional level, and a state level. And I hope as I go through my remarks here, you'll remember and think of that vision and see how we are doing that in Georgia. And in order to be able to implement vision, you have to have some infrastructure in place. And the governor, when he came into office, created the Commission for New Georgia, which is a think tank of all C-level or CEO level business leaders in Georgia. And one of the first topics they took on was workforce development, because that's what they were struggling with. We needed those folks coming in, able to fill the jobs of today and tomorrow. So the governor listened to them, took those recommendations, moved a vehicle called the State Workforce Investment Board directly underneath him, created our office, and charged us with making that vision a reality in Georgia. And I was fortunate enough to be picked to implement this vision for the governor, and doing it through an initiative called Work Ready. And I think one of the things John mentioned to you is I came from the business sector, and one of the books I enjoyed reading was Jim Collins's book, Good to Great. We have a lot of very good things in Georgia. This is about going from good to great in Georgia. And if you want to do that, you have to do it with the hedgehog concept. And that's a lot of what Work Ready is about. It is getting all of your change being driven with one vehicle. So what is Work Ready? Well, it's 4 different elements, and depending upon who I am talking to, I will focus and limit my remarks on any one of those 4, because I could probably spend a day talking with you about all the different elements and how we're doing this. Today I'm going to really focus on certified work-ready communities, which is really a fundamental link with education at the local level. But we have work-ready certificates, and we've got that for every Georgian, every available Georgian that enters the workforce, and it starts with high school seniors. And it goes to college students and looks at GEDs, and we look at unemployed or dislocated workers. So every Georgian can earn a work-ready certificate. We have work-ready job profiling for every business. Every job in Georgia, I don't care what job it is, you can profile. And we link and align those two things together. Where we're driving change from economic development is through certified work-ready communities. And where we're really empowering regions and really connecting with our growth industries is through work-ready regions. We could not do this without a partnership, and I get emails all the time. I just got one from friends in New Hampshire. How are you doing this? What's your budget? And I sent back and I said, you know what? We have a lot of money. I know Senator Eric Johnson is here from Georgia, and he could probably agree with me. About 75% of our budget is preparing a workforce in Georgia. So we don't really need a lot of new money. What we need to do is get new thinking. So we've built this on a lot of partnerships with a lot of very good people we have in Georgia, creating a synergy to move from good to great. And in work-ready regions is where we really bring in our college and university level, really helping to align with our growth industries. Our service delivery system for work-ready, because we are delivering tools for business and industry and for every Georgian, is through our technical college system. And our technical college system is very consistent. It is headed by a commissioner, and every single one of our 159 counties in Georgia is served by a technical college. So what do? They provide work-ready assessments every day of the week for every Georgian. We have 33 job profilers, one at every technical college, that will profile any job within their service delivery area. We have skills gap training. We have 2 service providers for that, and our technical colleges provide skills gap training at no cost for every Georgian that would like to remediate themselves. It's offered in every one of our adult education classes. So those are the 3 services that we do provide. Those are our tools, and it is done through our technical college system. Okay, what is a work-ready certificate? I know my friends from ACT are here, and it is an ACT Work Keys credential. A lot of folks talk about ACT scores getting into college, SAT scores getting into college, being a college and work ready. So what this is an equivalent. What do you need to get into the job market? And that's what ACT Work Keys does. And it does it by levels. These 3 assessments we affectionately call the big 3. And this is what 85% of the jobs require. We have 4 levels in Georgia. We are the only state to recognize a platinum level, realizing that the jobs of tomorrow are going to require more and more critical thinking skills. We are the only state to put a work habits component in. You take a work-ready assessment, you finish the big 3, you take a work habits assessment. It's again powered by one of an ACT Work Keys tool called Talent Assessment. And this report's given every Georgian. They get a green, yellow, and red light. Green means here's what you bring. Here's the work habits you bring employers value. Here's what you need to improve upon. And here's where you need to develop a self-improvement plan. And again, our skills gap training provides tools to help people develop that. So this is used in a coaching role to develop Georgia's workforce. Most of all, linking to education, it's a common language. Business hires job seekers. Job seekers come from education. And a work-ready certificate has become our common language. Okay, when I meet with business people, they're getting excited because I meet with business people all the time. What's your capacity to deliver? And so if you look, within the last 11 months, we've gone from 0 to 16,533 work-ready certificates being earned. We're at a capacity of 3,000 per month. We feel very comfortable about that because our job growth on 2008 is about 43,000 new jobs. So we feel very comfortable with our ability to deliver capacity. Okay, what does it mean? College and work ready. Well, guess what? Work ready gold means you are ready for college without remediation. It's a correlation ACT did, and they've got a white paper on it. So this is a pretty neat tool because when you're talking about being college and work ready. We actually had ACT Work Keys in Georgia, And if you look on the right side, I actually aggregated ACT's data up before we took this statewide. So these are not anything that's in our new data. This is the old data we had, and I related it to job profiles that we had done either past or present. About 10% of our workforce was at a gold level, and about 24% of our jobs are profiling at a gold level. Now, what was interesting is 80% of these folks were already in the job market or trying to get in the job market, and 20% of those were high school students. Well, when I took this to Governor Perdue, it was the first thing the Commission for New Georgia wanted to know, what's the skills gap? And if you want to eliminate it, you have to know what it is. And so now the governor understood why business was unhappy. This is what we did in 1 year. And this goes into what we're doing in college-ness with ADP. It's that rigor going into our classroom. That's what you're seeing. It's also our ability to measure and hold people accountable. You're seeing that as well. And so we're beginning to move this skills gap and closing it in Georgia. High school seniors. Now that's part of our available workforce. The data you saw before was existing and available, was a combination of both. And we are measuring gold level high school students. We're at about 18.6%, and we're just beginning, now that we can measure, the ability for us to be able to close this. And this is a voluntary program. These are kids that valued earning a work-ready certificate. No one told them they had to take it. They volunteered. Now, I really wanted to spend my remaining time talking about certified work-ready communities, because if you're driving change, you better have a good driver. And so we started out this asking counties to come on board and letting the governor recognize them as being certified work-ready. And they do two things. There's a certain percentage of their available workforce that earns work-ready certificates, a certain percentage of their existing workforce, and they have to increase their graduation rate. Now, it's really clear and very transparent. On our website, every county's out there. They know their data. They know exactly the number of people they got to get certified. And they all signed up and agreed, and it's voluntary. And they know exactly how much they got to increase their graduation rate by. And what we did is we didn't make it a percentage. We made it by the number of kids, because in some of our rural counties, it's 5 kids, 6%. So when you start making it about people, it's very personal. And when you bring in the business community, it becomes a very mentored-oriented process. Now, we're also, with our high school graduation program, we're linking it with high school graduation coaches, which is another tool that Governor Perdue has put in to help schools increase their graduation rate. They use 22 data points and things like that, and getting to know the kids to identify at-risk kids. In our graduation, our certified work-ready community team leaders work with high school graduation coaches. So what are our results to date? Well, gee whiz, we were hoping for 15 counties last year. We got 73 in 90 days, and we work with them. Now this year, we just did a second sign-up period. We had 104 that are on here. The color coding depends on who have been funded, who are doing this for free, just because they want to do it. But what we found is we're at about now 110 counties. And that's like over 2/3 of our state in a year. So the transparency has been very successful. How are we doing? 14 counties are exceeding their work-ready certificate goals, and they've achieved awards. 43 of these counties are on track to reach their high school graduation goals, and 13 attained their goals in 1 year. Georgia's moved from a 60% graduation rate to 72% in just a few years. So it's working. I'm just going to highlight a couple things before I close, because I can see my time is up and I'm getting the hook. What is so successful about this? It's voluntary. You have to empower people to change, and you have to give them a simple metric that they can rally around. You have to have clear and transparent goals, and you have to let the community pick its champion. 42% of our team leaders come from the Chamber of Commerce. Some of our best counties are business leaders that are championing this. But one of our best counties is a state school board member from Georgia. She's on the State Board of Education. She's championing one that's in the contender for becoming the first. We provide support. I have a team leader on my team that meets with these folks regularly, and we bring them together. We find out what's working and what do they need help with. We link to high school graduation coaches, and if you want to know more about that, come see me. I'd be happy to share that information with you, along with working with community coaches. And if you want some more information, the governor's Work Ready initiative was just published in the IEDC Spring Journal. Just in closing, our Work Ready regions in progress, we got all these counties, and I got this great state plan from the State Workforce Investment Board, and I just married both of these things together. And we did it with these Work Ready regions, aligning to growth industries in Georgia. And the neat thing about what we're doing here is they're industry-led. Either a retired business executive or a business executive on loan to us is leading these projects. And so, and again, if you want some more information about that, come see me. This next map shows you how we roll up with our state economic development program. So I'm going to wrap up here talking about this linking. Here's the piece we were missing in Georgia, and those were workforce readiness tools. We've put those in. We link to our knowledge. That's our education in work-ready regions. We're building career pathways. With ADP, the American Diploma Project is very much a part of work-ready regions. We're developing seamless education pathways. Also understanding our dislocated worker, transitioning workforce, and experience hands-on as well, and we're linking those together. Our website's got tons of information. Y'all have cards in front of you telling you about that. And I hope in closing you saw a very transformational strategy. We have a Work-Ready certificate for every Georgian, Work-Ready job profile for every business, Work-Ready communities for every county, and driving growth with Work-Ready regions. So thank y'all very much, and I just encourage you to visit our website for more information.
Thank you. Roger Sampson, President of ECS.
Thanks, took me a second. I've been asked to really focus in as it pertains to changing our high schools to graduation machines to talk about the workforce piece. Well, the good news is that I think a lot of the areas that we have to hit and target and changes that we need to make are one and the same as you've heard from our previous speakers. So in order to move forward, let me first talk to you about what the current state of most schools look like. And I'm speaking about mainly middle schools and high schools here. And what you can see is a typical school in this country, that the schools focus on teaching skills in isolation. There's no common assessment that's used. It changes from classroom to classroom, teacher to teacher, and it becomes a very broad spectrum by the time you get through an entire state or a nation. The result of that is students have a heck of a time applying what they've learned. Even if they're A students, whatever that means, they have a heck of a time applying those skills once they leave that classroom, that school, and get out into real life. They cannot make the connection between why they're spending 6 to 8 hours a day in schools and what happens with their life after schools. Now, we've heard a lot about how we go about changing that and getting that to be connected. And we've made significant changes in trials at that. But most of those trials have been at the high school level. The data's pretty clear. Kids are checking out before they get to high school level. They're checking out here. The result of all this lack of relevance and lack of transferable skills is, when I refer to the business community of the employers, I'm also talking about higher ed at whatever level you want to talk about. There's this huge remediation problem. They're not prepared to enter skilled workforce. They're not prepared to enter further education or training, whether it's at a technical school, community college, or four-year university. Here's the frightening thing for me. We talk about specific skills, And yet, this is what we know right now. We're projecting that we know that the typical high school graduate in 2008 will have 10 different jobs, full-time jobs, by the time they're 35. And 8 of those 10 jobs have not even been created yet. Now, that is a challenge for all of us through the continuum of the education system. If we get this targeting down too low, to too specific, then how can we possibly target that if we don't even know what the skills will be needed? What we do know is you'll need to be an ongoing, constant learner. A couple of people have diagrammed this in different ways. The numbers might vary a little bit. The trend, though, is pretty clear. And the trend is that there are fewer and fewer jobs available to make a living wage without training beyond a high school diploma. There is just literally going to be no opportunity for that. Therefore, we know that people leaving our system, first challenge, get them through our high school system. Second challenge, through there with skills that can be applied and transferred and ongoing. This was also picked up by a number of our speakers. While we know right now, the reports that ACT have done and other, we know that the skill level, the rigor of those skills to go into the skilled workforce versus higher education are virtually the same. And in many cases, skilled workforce requires a little bit rigorous, more rigorous skills. The public perception continues to be that workforce ready is lower than university or post-secondary. This is a huge issue for us to get over in this country because our high schools, the title of this session, changing these from dropout factories to diploma and graduation machines, if we're going to do that, we have to stop thinking that some kids are going to enter the workforce and some are going to go to higher ed. They're all going to go to work at some point. They're all going to go to work. And those of you that are parents know we have to target that. This is just a brief equation. I don't mean to tell you that work keys is the same test as ACT is in college prep, but I can tell you that there are equivalents and equals and scores with the data strongly supports that when you score a 5 on work keys in mathematics, that is equivalent in performance to an ACT score of 18 to 21. But there is a huge difference, and if we don't recognize it, we will fall short continually. I don't care if you are a platinum on a work keys. And I'm going to close my section on giving you a perfect example that's live in a minute. I basically took the gamut, if you can, of a spectrum. What has to be done with young people, whether it's at high school, community college, job placement, university system. These are things that have to be done, and I've broken it into foundational skills, your typical math literacy, reading literacy, and ability to communicate effectively and find information. Then I have this section down there called technical skills, and if you've been in our high schools in this country in the past 55 years, you'll recognize them: welding class, computer classes, home economics, etc. And then I have this other section over here that talked about the soft skills. For decades in this country, high schools attempted, we took a shot at doing work ready by tackling that technical skill area. So keep in mind that 8 of the 10 jobs that a graduate in 2008 is going to have, it hasn't been created yet. Even if we had the capacity in our high schools to do a terrific job on this, how would we do that when we don't know what 80% of the jobs even are yet? I'm suggesting the role of high schools in this country is, in fact, around those fundamental, foundational skills that are focused on transferring learning and applying learning after high school. We have 2 types of kids in this country. I know we have a lot more than that. But for purposes of this, we have the kids that can't and we have the kids that won't. For the kids that can't, We got to target the instruction to them. I don't know of any kids that come to school on their first day in elementary school that don't want to be there, don't want to be great learners, aren't excited about learning. But by the time we get them through about 6, 7, 8 years, they don't know why they're there. And some of them are incredibly challenged with what's delivered to them. The other ones are incredibly bored. What do? We deliver to the middle. I'm not picking on teachers here. You've been given no other system but to deliver in that fashion. You deliver to the middle, you alienate at least 50%, at least. So targeted instruction for those that can't. When you do that, you change the reason that they're there and feel like their needs are being met. For those that won't, and these are the ones that really bother me now, there are a substantial percentage of the 40% in this country that drop out and don't graduate. They're very capable young people, but they absolutely see no connection in how they're spending 6 and 7 hours of their day to life outside of that, because our curriculums are delivered in isolation, textbook-driven, and have no relevance to life outside of the world of the classroom. So if we could deliver the instruction as rigorous as it should and can be, and content-specific where needed, math, sciences, if we delivered that in an application-based, career orientation, life-connected, those kids engage. That's why that traditional approach that we took for vocational ed in the past, that seemed to work for some of those kids. It wasn't that it was technically good, it was that they got the relevance. They could understand how it was used when class was over. I'm going to go to a tool. It's the work keys, because I was asked to focus on workforce development. Now, I know the work that Matt's doing at Achieve, where they're talking about end-of-course exams, that will also get us there eventually. But I want to take one that's in place right now, and that's work keys. Are there others? There probably are. But for those of you that don't know work keys, like the back of your hand, it's basically an exam that's based on millions of hours of profiling specific jobs on the job with the people that do the job around applied mathematics, reading for information, and locating information. There's over 15,000 jobs currently profiled in this country, and more being profiled every day and every week. And this exam takes an individual and measures their skills in those areas and other areas against the actual skills levels necessary in those areas for these 15,000 profiled jobs. Now, that's a very, very different piece of information than a letter grade of A, B, C, D, whatever from our high schools. It's a very different piece of information than a transcript. This is a piece of information that allows an individual to document their skills. It's transferable, and in fact, it can produce a document called a Career Readiness Certificate, which has been spoke about by Deborah and others. While those were powerful pieces to look at and paint a little bit of a roadmap for us, there was a piece that's missing, and now that piece is here. There's 2 companies that have gone through the development of curriculum that is aligned to the work keys, standards, and skills. And they did a couple things that make them unbelievable tools for the K-12. K-12. And that is, they've said work keys only starts really at about a high school level, a level 3 score. Because employers said, any score lower than a 3, they're not ready to have potential success at that job. Therefore, we're not going to measure it. We're not going to score it. It's terrific to say we want everybody to be in the NBA, but not everybody is always ready for the NBA. So the gap between Park League and the NBA is a lot. Winn is a company, Worldwide Interactive, who has aligned curriculum and developed instruction aligned to move kids up the ladder. So you could intervene early. Now, here's what's really different. Remember what our schools look like? Skills in isolation, delivered to the middle, don't check for understanding individually until the end of the year. We're not proactive. You heard Governor Romer, you heard Chancellor Klein talk about we need to know how we're progressing so we can make adjustments to hit the target. So if you take an aligned curriculum to a work keys, it's individualized and it's self-paced. That's a huge paradigm shift. Students move through the system not at the end of the course, not at the end of the year or the semester, when they demonstrate proficiency. That might be a week, it might be 3 years. The instruction and assessment is application-based the way it's delivered. So it's delivered in the context of having to apply the skill. It's delivered in the context, in fact, it can be crafted to be in a career cluster that has interest to that individual. So we get the relevance involved in it. And maybe more importantly, with teachers who have an overwhelming schedule, is that it's electronically managed. Okay. How do we get that incentivized? It's pretty obvious. If young people value it through apprenticeships, job applications, money, pay, etc., they'll do it. As Chancellor Klein said, he used an incentive program around cell phones, and now all the rhetoric around not more testing, we over-test. First question kids ask in those schools now, when's the next test? Because it's relevant in their life. And here's a story I'll close with. There are some hidden powers when you uniform the standard of measure and you add incentive value to it. And this is my fear, that it's just not about high expectations and really high standards and targeted instruction and relevant delivery. I took some of the highest performing math students in Anchorage, Alaska when I was a commissioner there. I went to classroom teachers from large high schools, not 3-teacher high schools. Said, give me your best. They look like any other major high school in this country. Give me your best math students. I want to give them an exam. Said, here they are. These are our top. Many of the kids, I gave them the work keys math. Many of the kids did not even score the minimum 3. They didn't score the minimum 3. These are strong math kids. This is the response I got. 50% of those teachers of those kids said, oh, that test is a bunch of junk, it's a poor test. Positive side was 50% of those teachers says, what do you mean? I know these kids know those skills. I know they do. They're strong, they get it. Those teachers said, I need to examine how I teach it and how I check for proficiency. So this is a way to add relevance and look at proficiency versus time, has the way that we can change how we teach teachers to teach and how we assess. So if we could do anything to get there, to make these graduation factories, high expectations, transferable skills, targeted instruction, relevancy, and you know the rest. It's the same for work as it is for higher ed. You got to make it meaningful and relevant. You got to check to make sure you're going down the road before you end the year. Thanks.
Thank you, Roger. Tom, welcome.
I'm going to conclude our panel with a couple observations about the policy and practice implications of what we've just heard, and then spend a couple minutes just looking forward and talk about what's next. We've probably spent enough time on the problem, but I do want to highlight an area that we haven't spent much time on. And that would be the fourth one. I call it weak core technology, and the corollary, lack of R&D. We still do school the way we did 100 years ago, by and large. It's a teacher and 25 kids in a classroom, and best case scenario, as Roger said, you have a pretty good job of a teacher attempting to continuously assess and modify instruction for the benefit of most kids in the classroom. That's best case scenario. And I think we know enough today about the science of learning, and we see enough really interesting learning technology to begin to have the sense that there should be much more productive ways to build learning environments for kids and for adults. One of the unfortunate things about education is that there's been very little R&D, very little public R&D, and because the system is so inefficient, it's kept out private investment, very little private sector investment. So we have a system that has very little innovation around the core technology of teaching and learning. Here's a couple lessons learned from the last 15 years as a superintendent and as a nonprofit leader. Most discouraging thing that I've learned, there's only one thing wrong with a bad school: everything. There's just not an easy fix, and that's particularly true for high schools. They're very large, complicated institutions. You can't fix one thing. You can't just put in an energetic principal. You can't just launch a new professional development program. You can't just raise the standards and hope that more kids are successful. Here's a contrast, and I used to get, at the Gates Foundation, I had the good fortune of sponsoring about 1,000 school improvement projects and sponsoring several thousand new school development projects. So I very frequently, every week, had the opportunity to be in great new schools and struggling existing schools. The contrast, I think, is quite remarkable in that everything about those environments is different. The curriculum, the instruction, the leadership, the scale, the schedule, the way the adults work together, the relationship that the adults have with the children, whether or not there are sustained adult relationships, the relationship that that school has with families and the community, and maybe most important, the culture and the expectations that exist. Everything is different between a good school and a bad school. What that says to me is that fixing a struggling school, making dramatic improvement in a relatively short amount of time, it's a very complicated matter. We're still not very good at it in this country. There's very little capacity for school improvement. And there's almost no scaled capacity. I mean, at the high school level, there's only a couple very small nonprofit organizations. When Governor Romer was here in the back of the room, I remember on a number of occasions sitting in his office talking about the 50 very large struggling high schools in his district. And he would say, who can we turn to? And I'd say, well, there's First Things First, and there's talent development. The most either one of them could take on would be one, maybe two schools. Or I had 50 that were in big trouble. So we don't know enough about how to dramatically improve schools, and we don't have the capacity that we need. So here's the frustrating, difficult conclusion that I came to. What we do know how to do is to start very good new schools. And thousands have been launched in the last 20 years. So the frustrating conclusion is, in the case of chronic failure, we should close bad schools and we should open new schools. Now, that's a politically difficult thing to do if you're a policymaker or if you're a superintendent. There's nothing more difficult, more gut-wrenching for a community than to close a bad school. Even the worst school has a constituency around it. So I don't underestimate this, having done it before. But what I do know, after a couple thousand data points, that in almost every case, we saw a significant improvement with a replacement strategy. Now, that's particularly true with charter management organizations. I think you're most likely to see a significant improvement if there's a network that has a really well-designed school model, and if that school is part of a really well-designed management system. That happens most frequently in charter management organizations. And that's why I'm very enthusiastic about scaling those. The challenge is it's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to open a charter. It's very difficult to create a multi-site network of charters. In most states, they're underfunded. Most states don't allow multi-campus approvals. The facilities challenge is monumental. And so it's wonderful that we have networks like High Tech High and Aspire and Achievement First, but it's in spite of extraordinary odds. It's great that we have franchisers like KIPP. They're not really a network, it's a franchise model, but they only have 50. They should have 500 schools today, and it's because of the extraordinary barriers that they face. So replacing a school where there's so much wrong and it's so hard to fix, my sense is the best bet is a new school model, one that's been proven and one that is supported by a very strong network. Last comment on lessons learned over the last 15 years, one thing I don't think I did very well in philanthropy is helping cities manage the choices that they were creating. So the great news was that Joel has been able to open hundreds of new schools. We, at the Gates Foundation, we funded about 250 new high schools just in New York City. One thing we didn't do very well together is to think from a customer standpoint about the number and type and location of the choices that we were creating. I think we created a chaotic situation by introducing so many choices. I believe in educational choice, but I think families ought to have a rational number and type of choices. And so I think cities and states have an obligation to be thoughtful about the options that are available to students. And they ought to pay attention. If you're a policymaker, pay attention to what kinds of choices are available, where are they located, what are the transportation options, what are the enrollment features, how can we use choice, how can we ensure that choice is equitable and drives the sort of outcomes that we really want. Now, let me just close with a quick look ahead. And I'll start with this sort of an ironic observation after funding schools like KIPP. KIPP is a really good 1950s version of school. And it was sort of ironic working for Bill Gates that we ended up focusing on a very traditional model with a rigorous core curriculum, with a strong college prep. Nothing innovative about that at all, except that low-income kids typically don't have access to that sort of an environment. But I am quite convinced that, as I said earlier, that we should be able to create learning environments that are far more productive and more cost-effective. Here's the two big movements that are happening on the content front in education today. We're at the beginning of a battle of proprietary content and open content. On the proprietary side, what I'm really excited about are game technology. And we're beginning to see folks that helped build Second Life, that helped build World of Warfare and Halo, are starting to think about learning technology. They've glimpsed how powerful and how engaging these virtual environments can be, and many of them are beginning to think about learning. And you'll see starting this fall the introduction of a new generation of learning technology that I think holds great potential for some kids, maybe not all, so that they can choose in a number of environments, some that have sort of a combat theme, or some or a competition theme, some that have a virtual environment, an exploration theme, but where you can skin an environment, choose a sort of learning style, and spend some time every day in a highly engaging and very challenging environment. That's really expensive, right? These modules cost a lot of money, $20 or $30 million for for a typical game. And so this is a private sector play, largely. We're going to see many of these new products sold direct to consumer so that the companies have an opportunity to seek a return on investment. But it's really a backdoor curriculum strategy. You'll see direct to consumer move into the SES and tutoring market, then move into the supplemental market, and then Pearson and McGraw will buy them and they'll become part of the backbone of curriculum management systems in schools, but ones that can serve up really engaging content. In parallel, we're seeing the beginning of a promising open education resource effort. This is much more powerful in higher education, where teachers can teach whatever they want, however they want. So you see more adoption of open content at that level. It's still quite difficult in K-12 to make really good use of open content. It's all growing organically today, and so the teachers that use open content are the intrepid individualists that can sort and synthesize, pull stuff together, and deliver with varying results, right? Sometimes extraordinary and sometimes really bad. The play here is that my sense is that with foundation leadership and for-profit leadership, we will see several different open content plays emerge, maybe different platforms that have a common look and feel. Some are going to adopt the ADP standards, some are going to sit on top of an ACT assessment platform. So there'll be different plays, but you'll see these environments or platforms where developers have an incentive to post open content and where there's a service economy around it. The Red Hat and IBM relationship with Linux, where there are incentives for professional development and implementation support and supplemental content and assessment around open content. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but I am pretty confident in one way or another you're going to see some really interesting open content plays. Just a quick sign of what's to come right here in Florida. Wireless Generation, run by Larry Berger, produced a free, very high quality Basel for elementary reading. It was adopted as a supplemental textbook in Florida. It's being widely used now. Larry's company sells little handheld assessment devices and professional development that goes with it. That's an example of the new economy that will develop, a service economy around free content. Now, we spend about $10 billion a year on those miserable textbooks. A lot of us hate them. The opportunity to shift that money to much more, to content that's at least as good and becoming better with really good services around them is I think, a pretty cool opportunity. So in some respects, we're going to see a battle between these two movements of proprietary and open content. Together, they're going to bring about the personalization revolution. In the next 10 years, we're going to see more than half of our kids doing more than half of their learning online. I'm pretty sure Clayton Christensen took that quote from me, but it's in his recent book, Disrupting Class. The big flip to come to engaging adaptive content creates some really interesting opportunities for the kids that are not doing well today, and particularly for kids that we're going to have a hard time pushing through content. There's just some kids, 10 or 20%, we're just not going to push through content in a traditional environment. And it's my sense that there's a set of new options around adaptive content. If you add the powerful sustained adult relationship and applied learning opportunities, I called them apprenticeships, but broadly speaking, as Debbie Meyer would say, opportunities for young people to be around adults they can imagine themselves becoming. So if you have powerful and smart content that understands what you need to learn and queues up a variety of engaging options, there's an adult that, along with your parent or guardian, is monitoring your progress in school and helping to manage your educational choices, and queuing up really interesting work and community-based learning opportunities. That, to me, can be a pretty powerful learning environment. It's the next generation alternative schools. It's what performance learning centers in Georgia can become. It's what the big picture schools can become with new management systems and new digital content. So I think a very interesting set of opportunities to come that are going to result in smarter schools and smarter systems and smarter networks. Let me just close with a quick story from a philanthropy roundtable meeting. It had a much better view. It was a big open conference room in Laguna Niguel, looking out at the Pacific, and we had this really fun argument about which city was the best education reform city in America. So that went on for a while, and people advocating for their own city. I don't even remember who won. The interesting conclusion that came from that discussion, that the 200 of us that participated embraced, was this: it will be the cities that embrace educational entrepreneurs that are going to win. It's going to be the cities, the schools, the school districts, and the states that embrace educational entrepreneurship. It's those folks that are going to win. And so I'd ask you, if you're a local policymaker or a district leader or a state leader, is your state keeping out, making life difficult for education entrepreneurs, or is it embracing? Is it asking the private sector to join? Is it asking nonprofit entrepreneurs to join, to think about how things can be better and different? At least do that in the alternative space, right? Those are the kids that our systems have largely forgotten today. Why not put an innovative initiative together that reconnects with kids that society has left behind? Try some new technology, try it in a new low-cost format, help to demonstrate that we can build learning environments that are far more productive and cost-effective if we embrace education entrepreneurship. Thanks.
We began 15 minutes late, so we will have our question and answer session now and conclude at 5:15. If anyone absolutely has to leave now, this will be a time to hop up and do so. Okay.
Go ahead, Bob. Do you want to just
You have a
raise, if you raise your hand, Bob will share the microphone with you so everyone can hear.
doesn't seem to be turned on, but we have a question. Is it on? Is it on? Oh, it's on.
There you go.
Okay. I might have a question to start with, if you don't mind, and then we'll see who in the room has one. A lot of people, several panelists mentioned the desirability of having curriculum connect with the student's life outside of the classroom. But for an unfortunate number of students, life outside of the classroom consists of dysfunctional family, home life, in a crime-infested neighborhood, rife with gangs and so forth. What do you do in that situation? I'll direct that to anyone who wants to respond. Nobody wants to respond. We said have the curriculum relate to their real life. Well, for real life for some kids is difficult. Roger?
Go ahead.
You know, one of the things I was going to say is that, you know, I think that's a very difficult question to answer because, you know, it's hard to truly understand what possesses a young person to go down that path, you know, and a lot of it is just the world that they're in and the environment they're in, and, you know, they don't have a parent at home, obviously, that cares. And so that's very difficult because only a parent can really do that or somebody coming in. But if you wanted to take and answer that from the perspective we've all been in today, I think it's about giving someone an opportunity to be passionate about something or to find something that interests them or excites them. And I think our opportunities in high school to not only put in the academic rigor and the accountability and the measuring, and I think all of us talked about that, but also I think there's a lot with this career pathway. I think what the American Diploma Project is doing with this interfacing of college into high school, because a lot of the kids you're talking about don't have any parents who've ever gone to college. So I think the opportunity to bring that in so that it becomes more relevant, and I think the opportunity to get business more engaged and involved. I know we're doing that regionally in Georgia, but to bring it into high school, but also to start looking at it even in middle school, to try to help people at a younger age become passionate about something. And hopefully that will help that and mentoring and caring and all those other support systems that you've got, going on within your communities.
I think Deborah hit it, and my summary would be relevance earlier. And you can use, regardless of the home situation, you can find things that are meaningful to kids. Teachers want to do a great job, but we have not prepared them to do a great job necessarily.
Thank you. Questions from the audience, please. And we'd like you to ask your question in the microphone because the whole event is being recorded. Questions?
If we're looking for graduation machines, which statistically speaking, we're looking for improved data collection, can we at the same time be in favor of one formula to process graduates from high school if we have a patchwork of different systems?
If I'll just comment on that, if I may. And I heard a lot of agreement among the panelists today in terms of addressing the kind of a combination of characteristics, services, and thought processes that high schools need to go through to kind of put that together. But we also heard, asking the question from Tom, maybe it's so many different things and requires so many different actions to, on a scale basis, look at our preparation of teachers, curriculum, retraining, entrepreneurism, technology, choice, that there may very well be a very low probability that that we will get the real opportunity to put all that together in a sequence that makes sense. By that I mean, you can say, well, we're going to raise graduation standards 5 years out, but we have an obligation to do a lot of things in between. Otherwise, we create an unfair situation for students and their aspirations. So I think that although we tend as a profession, I think we're hearing a lot of consensus about the characteristics that need to be in place. And I think Tom said that we just don't have much in the way of scaling capacity right now, both political capacity and technology and the systems to make it all happen so that we would get the most effect. But from my view, if we don't do it on a large scale basis, then we're going to continue to stay in a state of crisis over it.
I would just like to comment on that question because I thought it was very interesting about what's the measure. First of all, were you referring to graduation rate in general being a uniform? Yes. Yeah, and actually, having more uniformity among your high school graduation rate, I think would enable us to be more of an apples to apples. I read a lot of graduation rate data. I get very frustrated because depending upon the person writing it and depending upon what their agenda is, I could see multiple different numbers for our state. And I know that what we put out, the Governor's Office of Student Achievement puts out for Georgia, was the one that No Child Left Behind approved. I know that the governors in the southeast part of the country are coming to consensus on that measurement. It would be nice to have that standard measurement for all of us so everybody has an apples to apples comparison. With that said, I think you brought up another good thing about the uniqueness of graduation rate. And so I talked about the Governor's High School Graduation Coach Program. That's actually online. There are 22 parameters. There's the uniqueness of every one of the at-risk students, because students are at risk depending on poverty, depending on absenteeism. There's multiple things. And there's actually in Georgia about 22 measurements. So you are not making it all about one. You are aligning efforts, based on, what could most help this group of students and what could most help this group of students. And that's a lot of what we're doing with the community, with coming in from the business, working with the graduation coach. They get, okay, these are the kids that could be helped with mentoring, and that. And so there is that uniqueness, and I think you need to have both. We all as states want to be measured to the same standard, but we have to understand that every child's unique. And I would just encourage you to go online. Our Department of Education has that information, and they also have the 22 measurements that are used as well.
Other comments from the panel on that question? Other questions? Yes, sir.
Mark Halpert from the Learning Disabilities Association of Florida. Two questions which come up are, you've broken the information down by white, African American, and Hispanic. Have you ever looked at the graduation rates for kids who learn differently? The visual experiential learner versus the more logical sequential? And also, have you ever looked at the number of kids that are having trouble with reading whose vision does not track correctly? Because we've done a lot of work in that area, and the numbers are huge.
Unfortunately, I think we, and this is related to the, the dropout, the whole dropout calculation, even an agreement on a national calculation. It pretty much disadvantages the states with the best systems. And personally, I think we ought to be accounting for every child. But I think that as is just as human nature, we tend to lump broad categories. And I have no doubt that we need to do a far better job at diagnosing early on students that learn differently, students with visual disability and other disabilities, and tailor those instruction not to lower standards, but tailor those instruction to get the most benefit. And I think that there has probably been more research dollars in exceptional student education than any other field. But I don't think people outside of exceptional student education, meaning policymakers and school boards, I don't think they understand because it's too kind of an in-house kind of conversation. The words are differently, language is differently, and so on. And so what I would like to see is an opening up, if you will, for a better, clear conversation about exactly what the issues are and what needs to happen in school to address them.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right about the tons of research, but very little done on different learning styles and on visual perception issues.
We have time for only one more question before we adjourn. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm Melissa Ayler with the Governor's Office in Texas. And I was just wondering if a lot of you talked about the need for relevant learning opportunities for students. And I'm just wondering what role, if any, you see CTE courses playing in that.
I'm going to just jump on that because that's probably one of my passions. That's a lot of what we're doing in the regions is, I talked a lot about the community effort, but having this measuring tool that we're using with ACT WorkKeys for foundation skills, but that's only a part of it. The other comes from experience, and that was that circle I had on the left. And we are working very much with CTAE in Georgia, lining that with our ADP, really it's all about kids being college and work ready. And in the regions where these are industry-led, we actually have built industry networks with an industry leader that, is looking at the workforce needs short-term because we are looking at their immediate needs, but long-term. And looking at internships, apprenticeships, things that, along with providing information, what should be in those career tech education programs, getting the young adults some hands-on skills, allowing this internship, apprenticeship, and strengthening, those courses. In Georgia, we've got one diploma now, so really we're looking at career pathways. It's not just CTAE, it's really looking at for every student. You just talk to any child going to college, a senior year in high school, they'd love the opportunity to get some internship and hands-on experience. So we're looking more and more at, using those 1 or 2 courses as being electives, particularly in your junior or senior year, and doing more and more aligning with these regions we're building with our growth industries. So sure others, it was just a very passionate question you asked for, so I wanted to answer.
Let me comment on it too, because from working with states, we've seen this as an important but difficult issue, particularly in states that are trying to change graduation requirements and get more rigorous. Many of them know they need to build the relevance in, but are having a very hard time figuring out how to do that as a state policy. And what I see as the environment out there is career technology education, CTE, is a vast array of stuff. Probably some very good that combines the rigor and the relevance and is very powerful, and probably some, maybe a lot, that's not nearly as good and maybe sacrifices the rigor for the relevance. And as a field, I think they're beginning to grapple with it from the national level on down to state and local entities, and try to figure out how they can become more a force for the rigor and relevance tie and show that there's high quality CTE that could probably blow away a lot of traditional courses and instruction. But I think in order to do that, they also have to contrast it with the kind of vocational education that really doesn't measure up. And I think they're grappling with that strategically, and I think states are now in an interesting position of trying to figure out how to, as I said earlier, how to, through policy, what role can states play in separating the high quality from the low quality, and perhaps allowing or enabling the high quality to flourish while putting policies in place that discourage the low quality. I have not seen too many states figure that out yet. I think it's an issue they're beginning to contend with, and they're struggling with. I think it comes up most notably, as I said, when you raise the graduation requirement. 4 years of mathematics, in your case 4 by 4, including 4 years of rigorous science, and you define the courses in math, algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2. What else would be allowed to, would you allow any substitutions for algebra 2? And if so, which courses? And what would the state role be in ensuring the comparable rigor? Very difficult but important set of issues. I think we're only at the beginning of wrestling with it, and there are not nearly as many promising models, I think, to point to so far from our perspective as we would like.
I want to thank the audience for attending. I want to thank our panelists. You've given us a lot to think about. This is not a problem we'll solve in an afternoon, but as you say, as I've said, we have a lot to think about, and I know we have other great events this weekend, so we are now stand adjourned.